to this train where people were traveling peacefully when suddenly an old man starts to spontaneously combust and turns into an infernal demon. This is where our super cool protagonist, Shinra Kusakabe, steps in. He tries to do something when he sees what's happening, but then a group of firefighters arrives and benches him, and they take down the thing in less than 5 seconds. Interestingly, when they finish, they say, "May his soul return to the great flame of fire." Apparently a ritual they always had to perform in these cases. But anyway, when everything is over, a piece of debris is about to fall on a nun due to the chaos. Yes, a nun who is also a firefighter. Crazy, right? But then she prays 3 Our Fathers, and the Holy Spirit saves her. Nah, just kidding. It's the protagonist who saves her, showing us from the beginning that he's really OP. After looking like a hero, but without shoes because he ignited his feet to save the waifu, he introduces himself to them and tells them that he was assigned to the special squad, Fire Force 8, being a 3rd-generation soldier. After that, we get a super cool opening, and we see that the protagonist was accepted as he goes to the station and meets the squad captain, Akataro Obi, and also Lieutenant Takahisa Hinowa, who tells him there's a little problem. The guy is smiling in his firefighter ID, and this happens every time he's nervous. It's here that the captain asks him why he joined the squad, and he says it was to become a hero. So the captain tells him he needs to work as a team, otherwise he won't be able to work with them, especially since he had the reputation of being a demon. Later, we meet the rest of the squad members, the nun from before, named Iris, and a beautiful waifu named Maki. But anyway, after the introductions, the captain gathers them to inform them that more people were suffering from spontaneous human combustion, basically what we saw at the beginning. These were known as first-degree infernals, and the squad's mission was to stop them and put their souls to rest, and above all, to continue investigating the cause of human combustion to end it and save humanity. After this, it's bedtime, and we see the protagonist dreaming of his mother and what seems to be his little brother, Sho, where he promises to become a hero to protect them. But suddenly, the scene changes to a lot of flames, and we see him being rejected by his family and called a demon. To top it off, the guy laughed in a really creepy way like a shark. But just then, the alarm goes off because an infernal had appeared, so everyone prepares to face it. When they arrive at the factory, they're informed that the infernal was out of control and needed to be stopped immediately to prevent the fire from spreading. But when they go in to save the soul of the factory owner's wife and the protagonist sees everything burning, he has a nervous breakdown due to childhood traumas he had with his mother, who apparently had also turned into an infernal. Seeing him like this, his teammates worry about him and tell him they're like the 3 musketeers, all for one and one for all. This way, the guy recovers, but suddenly he's attacked and sent flying. Then, he has another flashback to the past where we see his mother died in a fire, and he was blamed for her and his little brother's deaths. But on the day of that tragedy, there was a demonic figure among the flames, so the guy knew it was caused by someone else, and he promised to find them and become a hero. So, together with his team, he defeats the infernal and sends its soul to the great flame of fire. After this, we see a new member join Squad 8, Arthur Boyle, who self-proclaims as the Night King, and the name fits him as he wields a sword he calls Excalibur. Anyway, this blonde guy had previously studied at the academy with the protagonist, and they didn't get along well. So, the lieutenant puts him to the test along with the protagonist, as it was a tradition to have this kind of game with the rookies. In this case, both had to fight against Maki, who gives them a beating and shows us why she's nicknamed Witch, though the important thing here is that the waifu was seriously jacked. After this, the lieutenant tells the captain about the blonde's abilities, mentioning that he was also a 3rd-generation soldier. But right then, the alarm sounds for an infernal appearance. Upon arriving at the location, the captain tells the rookies they can't show their weapons in public. Despite their job being to put the infernal souls to rest, in reality, they were sending them to the afterlife, and they needed to show empathy towards the victims' families. Outside the house, the infernal creates flames to mock them, but when they enter, he is sitting calmly, and since this was the 2nd case in that family, the blonde takes him down gently. However, suddenly, the house starts to collapse, all thanks to a kid outside who did it just to toy with the squad. This motherless child was truly evil. Because of what he did, a girl was left orphaned. Seeing such a sad act, the protagonist couldn't sleep, thinking he needed to end human combustion as soon as possible. In a scene change, we see the evil guy talking with an afro-wearing dude in some kind of lab, where we find out they have a map tracking the infernal appearances. Additionally, they've created a powder that turns people into infernals and generates the flames we saw earlier. As if that weren't enough, these guys are constantly investigating Squad 8 and its captain. With what aim? Well, we'll find out later. On the other hand, they're about to continue the rookie games. A waifu, Tamaki Kotatsu, from another squad delights us with her incredible attributes. There were many squads in that place, making it easy for the Afro guy to infiltrate as a spectator. But before the games start, the protagonist sees a guy with an eye patch, who turns out to be the firefighter who saved him during the tragedy with his mother 12 years ago, and is also the captain of the first squad. He tries to talk to him, but the captain seems busy and ignores him. When he tries to stop him, time, Tamaki shows up, and they have an awkward but beneficial encounter for our boy. Okay, maybe not. After this, the games begin, and as soon as the protagonist enters the building, he encounters the evil guy who calls himself Joker. He had knocked out the soldiers in charge of supervising the games because he didn't want anyone to interfere with his meeting with Shinra. Right there, he tells him that he knows the cause of the fire that killed his mother, and that his little brother is still alive. This makes the protagonist furious, and he starts fighting Joker, wanting to know the whole truth and his objective. As the brawl drags on, it gives the blonde and Tamaki time to join the fray. Joker finds himself cornered and uses the powder to blow up the building and escape. However, the three make a great team and manage to survive in an epic way, except for the blonde who takes a huge hit. Afterward, the protagonist tells his captain what happened, leaving him with many doubts about the squad. Shinra joined the force intending to do the right thing, but after what Joker told him, he suspected that the Fire Force had secrets. It's here that the captain explains the squads are made up of 3 groups, one of which is the Hajime Industries, controlling all the weapons they use and having extensive information about the cause of human combustion. This information was confidential because each group kept things to themselves. The next day, they watch the news on TV, and there's no mention of the incident that occurred during the games, making the captain and Shinra even more certain that the Fire Force is hiding something. At that moment, the lieutenant arrives and informs them that they had studied the mysterious powder used by Joker, which turned out to be ashes from the Infernals. In a scene change, we see a firefighter, Setsuo Miyamoto, who is being accused in a trial for murdering several people. Suddenly, he transforms into an Infernal, but unlike the others, he retains his own consciousness, turning from accused to judge. The news quickly reaches Squad 8, so they prepare rapidly and head to the location. Meanwhile, the blonde and the protagonist were on another mission under Maki's orders, and since they were close by, they decide to get there ahead of time. Upon arrival, they start fighting the Infernal, but when the rest of the squad arrives, he feels cornered and escapes by flying. Since the protagonist is the only one who can fly, he chases him to another city, determined to stop him before he can start scorching people. Chaos ensues, and as the Infernal still retains his consciousness, he is terrified of the protagonist's power and, like everyone else, compares him to a demon, but it was quite the opposite. Our boy even sympathizes with his soul and, at his request, agrees to wait for the nun to arrive so she can perform the prayer and allow him to rest in peace. However, the dirty trickster tries to attack the moment Shinra lets his guard down. That's when Shinra gets angry and seeks to finish the fight, but he is interrupted by the captain of the 5th squad, Princess Hibana. She tells him that she will take care of the Infernal, but in reality, she wants to experiment on him. Since the protagonist disagrees, the captain restrains him along with her squad, but since Shinra is so OP, he breaks free easily and starts fighting them all, which they deserved for being so arrogant. However, his captain arrives and stops him, explaining that Princess Hibana has lab equipment they don't have, allowing them to experiment on the Infernal and learn more about human combustion. At the same time, she agrees to share the information she discovers about him, leading the captain to accept and let them take him away. In a change of scene, we see the nun crying while having a memory of the past, revealing that she knew the captain of the 5th squad since they were children. Seeing her worried, the protagonist tries to help her, but she prefers not to say anything and continues on her way. After this, the guys gather to train their physical strength since mastering fire wasn't all that important. At the same time, the protagonist takes the opportunity to ask the lieutenant about Hibana, as her behavior didn't sit well with him. He then tells him that she became a captain by illegally investigating Infernals and selling their data. In another scene, we see the waifu torturing the Infernal while laughing like a madwoman. Meanwhile, the nun was praying before going to talk to her, knowing that what she was doing was wrong and against her religion. However, since she decided to leave that behind and practically go crazy, she ends up kidnapping her. The brunette was very cunning because she knew that by doing this, she would attract the attention of the 8th squad, and thus she could get rid of Obi and the protagonist for sticking their noses into her investigations. When they find out that the nun is missing, the guys go to rescue her, causing chaos against the 5th squad. Here we see the lieutenant go into John Wick mode, telling Maki to show no mercy, as they needed to get information about spontaneous combustion at all costs. Meanwhile, the protagonist goes ahead to infiltrate the base and rescue Iris. The blonde follows his trail to help him, but encounters an old man who looks like one of the minions. Just kidding, he resembles them, but isn't one. The truth is, the old man gave a drug to the Infernal they were experimenting on to increase its firepower, so a big fight was about to break out. On the other hand, Maki and the lieutenant were already in the midst of a clash against a guy causing explosions with his gum. This is Toru Kashiri, a 3rd-generation soldier of the 5th squad. However, the lieutenant quickly puts him to sleep, but just when they were about to continue, the Charlie's Angels or something like that show up. They inform the captain of the situation, and she tells them to finish everyone off off because she didn't want to reveal any information. But that wasn't possible, as the blonde, despite having some trouble with the Infernal, ends up defeating it in a pretty cool way. And at the same time, Maki and the lieutenant do the same to the three girls. On the other side, we see our protagonist appear to save Iris. Before reaching the room where the blonde was, the three waifus who looked like Charlie's Angels try to stop the protagonist. However, the guy takes them all out with a single kick. Thanks to this, he manages to reach the captain, who is determined to stay on the dark side of the fire. The protagonist tries his best to save both of them, but when things get heated, the lowly starts using her Sharingan, leaving him dizzy and begins to stomp on him. Seeing what was happening to his friend, the blonde starts shouting at her to leave him alone. She tells her to go to church every Sunday, be good, and all that stuff. But the waifu tells her that there is no God, and if she believed in one so much, she should start asking him to save a place for the protagonist because she was about to send him there. At that moment, the guy manages to stand up using the flames from his feet and tries to fight back, but the waifu gets more serious, summoning a cherry blossom tree engulfed in flames. The blonde continues trying to evangelize her, telling her that she used to pray with her every night at the convent, and that she still had time to change. She doesn't understand why she's acting this way. We then see a flashback of the waifus. They used to live in peace and harmony at the convent with several nuns. Since she was very young, Hibana developed her powers and spent her time playing with the other girls, creating beautiful yet dangerous fire flowers. This led the head nun to scold her constantly, as despite having flames from the great sun, it was dangerous for her not to be responsible and risk burning her friends. But the one who ended up burning everyone in the convent that same night was an Infernal that appeared out of nowhere. The only ones who survived, thanks to Hibana's power, were the two of them. From that moment on, she realized that the flames were from the demon, and for that reason, she began to act like one. She left the convent and started doing whatever she wanted, working secretly for Hijima Industries, conducting experiments on Infernals. She requested the rank of captain in exchange to gain access to more information and funding. Returning to the present, we see the protagonist in torch mode and managing to defeat her. The waifu starts waking up, and the blonde tells her that she is no longer alone, that her power wasn't evil, she just needed to decide how to use it. Thanks to these words, she changes her mind. At the same time, she asks if she stopped being so shy, and the waifu says that from the first moment she went to see her alone, she realized her determination. On the other hand, the protagonist is glad to see them reconcile as sisters and tells her that whenever she needs help, she only has to call him, as the job of a hero is to help those in need. Here, folks, we see the waifu falling in love with the guy, and well, I think he has two good reasons to fall for her too. But aside from that, the Lolas finish their reconciliation, and the captain teaches her again how to make the fire flowers they created when they were kids. In a scene change, we see the three lieutenants, Hua, Rekka, and Kareem, meeting with the captain of the 1st Division, Leonard Burns, to inform him that the 8th Squad had a training exercise with the 5th Division. Although the captain knew that Obi was already making his moves, and that it was all a cover-up to prevent others from suspecting they were actually throwing punches. On the other hand, we see that Hibana stayed with the protagonist's friends to help them with their investigation. However, she makes it clear to the captain that they only rely on her, not the 5th Division, as they could only trust them to avoid being discovered. She also mentions that she wanted to uncover the mysteries of the fire force companies, as they suspect that someone from the 1st Division might be creating Infernals on purpose. This is what she thinks happened at the convent where she lived, and also with the last Infernal they captured. Since most of these types of Infernals were appearing in the jurisdiction of the 1st Brigade, they suspected them. Not to mention that the protagonist knew that the old guy with the patch knew what happened on the day of the fire where his mother died. So, after giving us a visual treat with the waifus in the shower, we see that the captain plans to infiltrate the protagonist and the blonde into the 1st Division as interns to train with them, as arriving without any permission could unleash a war against the 1st Division. Thus, the guys, along with two others from another division and Maki, infiltrate the 1st Division. Here we see that the protagonist is very reckless and challenges the Japanese Nick Fury to a training session. Yes, folks, the guy was obsessed with the old man, but he had no idea what he was getting into. So, the guys put on their uniforms and go train outside. First up is a guy from the 2nd Division named Takaru. This guy was super insecure and also in love with Tamaki, but despite his insecurity, it didn't mean he was weak. On the contrary, he created a bunch of fire missiles and told the lieutenant he was fighting against that he joined the fire brigade to control his ability since he was quite bad at it. And since Rekka was playing around with him, Kareem had to clean up his mess. Here we see that Kareem has the ability to convert heat into sound and sound into ice, instruments. Yes, folks, this guy used to fight with a trumpet, but whatever, Takeru's hands are bigger than Ralph the Demolisher's, so nothing surprises me anymore. But when it's the protagonist and the blonde's turn to face the captain, the old man tells them not to hold back as he wants to see what they're made of. At this, the blonde, always trying to get attention, stops the protagonist and tells him that he can handle it alone. However, he barely scratches the old man, who stops his sword with his hand and tells him he's a weakling. Seeing that he was the first person to stop his sword so easily, the blonde almost loses it, while the protagonist takes advantage of the moment to attack like a madman. The old man then asks why he joined the brigade, and he explains it was because his mother and brother died due to spontaneous combustion, and he wanted to solve that mystery and prevent others from suffering the same fate. With just a stomp on the ground, the old man sends him flying and says they still have a long way to go, but thanks to their determination, the old man allows them to stay and train with them. At the same time, the musician lieutenant tells them that despite not having any chance against the captain, they did quite well, but they needed to work harder to improve. In the scene change, we see a lieutenant talking on the phone or reporting to someone mysterious. He says that the evangelism is progressing smoothly, and that despite the obstacles, they will continue with their plan. On the other hand, we see Hibana continuing to provide Obi with information about the Infernals. Apparently, people transform upon contact with certain insects, and they suspect that one of the First Division's lieutenants might be working undercover, creating Infernals with these insects. Meanwhile, the protagonist and the blonde are staying with the people of the First Division. The lieutenant and the captain are constantly monitoring them to stay informed of any updates. However, they haven't discovered anything valuable yet. After this, the guys go to eat and talk with the other interns who are with them. Each one shares their reason for becoming a fire soldier. The protagonist's reason is already known. The blonde's reason is that a gentleman must protect the weak. One other wants to be popular with the waifus, and the guy with big hands wants to control his power. Speaking of waifus, Tamaki arrives at that moment and accidentally presses her chest into the protagonist's face. Yes, folks, this waifu seems to always have awkward accidents. However, the protagonist is spared a good smack because the alarm goes off and everyone rushes off to an emergency mission. Upon arrival, the lieutenants assign each of them a task, but since they are not from the First Division, they are only told to stay there and keep watch. At that moment, the protagonist looks toward an alley and notices someone in a First Division uniform using a jar with the insect mentioned by Hibana, transforming a guy who was there with just a touch. The guys run after the culprit into the alley, leaving the others to handle the Infernal. However, when they enter the alley, they find Kareem, Rekka, and Tamaki, so they can't figure out which of the two is responsible and start to act discreetly to avoid suspicion. Later, the guys return to the base and begin investigating the suspects, starting with Kareem. In his office, they find a jar with the same insect, but at that moment, Kareem arrives and tells them that he was also investigating the culprit behind the insects and knew there was an infiltrator in the First Division. Additionally, he found the insect at a crime scene with many children, leading him to believe that children were being used for experiments with the insects. This makes the protagonist realize that Rekka is the culprit, as he is known for luring children to give them firefighting advice and uses Tamaki to bring them in. We then see that this is exactly what Rekka was doing in an abandoned building, but he no longer wants to hide his identity and knocks out Tamaki to start experimenting on the kids. He does this to see which children can withstand the fire and avoid becoming infernals, looking for those superior to the new generation. The ones who pass the test will be handed over to his boss, who is known as the Evangelist. Tamaki wakes up and realizes that her Japanese Brad Pitt is crazy, so she tries to stop him. However, the bastard starts beating her, and just when he's about to send her to the great beyond, the protagonist arrives to save her. Well, as expected, Pyro was still alive, so he got up more pissed off than ever and started taking swings at the protagonist. Despite being a rookie and him being a lieutenant, he managed to fight on his level. At this point, he noticed that one of the bugs in the jar wanted to go after the protagonist. Then, the guy told him that he was the third chosen one the Evangelist was looking for. Since the protagonist had no damn clue what he was talking about, Rekka explained that he had something called Adala Bursts, a sacred flame that would guide humanity or something like that. Apparently, the Evangelist people were searching for these individuals, especially children. That's when the protagonist realized that his brother had died because of this, and the bastard told him it was just a minor inconvenience for what they wanted to achieve. This made Shinra angrier than he already was, and he started attacking desperately. Thanks to that, the guy knocked him flying and ended up resting on Tamaki's melon. Then he started shooting fire at both of them, burning all of the waifu's clothes. Thanks to this motivation from the waifu, the guy promised he would stop the lieutenant. He began assessing the battlefield and realized he had the advantage since he could fly and had more attack angles. So, he started using them and gave him a beating. As a result, the guy went crazier than before and began saying he wanted to turn everyone into flames and wrap the earth in fire, that flames were salvation and other really messed up stuff. He then tried to burn himself and also the kids, but before he could do that, Lieutenant Kareem and Ho arrived and completely froze him. After capturing the kid, they said they would interrogate him later, but at that moment, Rekka was assassinated by a sniper. This camper worked for the evangelist and was on top of a building with another guy. To make sure Rekka wouldn't talk too much, they sent him to meet St. Peter. But that wasn't all. The camper also tried to take out the lieutenants and managed to blow off Ho's arm with one of the shots. Fortunately, the guys came up with a plan to distract them and defend themselves, so they escaped for the time being. Once everything calmed down, Kareem told Tamaki that even though she didn't know she was being used by Rekka, she was still in trouble for bringing the kids. So, they put her under review, and the 8th Division decided to look after her for now. As for Kareem, he said he planned to help the 8th Division with the evangelist investigation. Later, we see that all the captains from each division and the protagonist are called to an emergency conference to discuss the evangelist. But before heading out, we see Hibana asking the protagonist for a sweet. Yep, folks, she was crazy about him, but now she had competition because Tamaki was also constantly leaning on him. On their way, Obi tells the protagonist that this is serious business since, as a captain, he had never experienced this kind of meeting before. They also pass by the Amaterasu power plant. Yep, not Itachi's fire, don't worry. This plant is responsible for producing all the city's energy. The protagonist was so amazed by it that he planned to visit it after the meeting. When they arrive at the palace where the emperor summoned them, we see Hibana talking alone with the captain of the 3rd Division, Dr. Giovanni. He, wearing a mask, scolds her for helping the 8th Division when her real job was to assist the Hijima companies. But we'll learn more about that guy later. When they enter, all the captains are present, but I won't mention the names of the others for now, just Benimaru from the 7th Division, who was supposedly the strongest of them all. The protagonist, fearless and with a devilish grin, started looking at him, and the guy thought he was looking for trouble. But they put that aside when the old man arrived. He tells them that everyone must unite to capture the evangelist. Before he could continue, Benimaru couldn't care less and just left. To avoid boring everyone, the old man kept it brief and told the protagonist that the evangelists were after him because he had the Adala Burst, a sacred flame used by the sun to create the world. Even the Amaterasu plant uses the same flame, which means the protagonist was incredibly powerful. Thanks to that power, he was able to defeat Captain Hibana and the other lieutenant. However, he wasn't the only one with that power. Several people from the 3rd generation might possess the same flame. It's also possible that many of the users with that power are the ones operating the power plant. During the meeting, Hibana didn't want to lose her sweetheart and told Obi to say that she didn't want to involve the other divisions and that the 8th Division could take care of protecting the protagonist. When the meeting ends, everyone returns to base except the protagonist. He heads to the power plant to see it up close. There, he meets the Joker, who tells him to continue investigating the evangelist since that way he could find his brother, who just so happens to work for him. Yep, his brother was still alive and apparently not on the good side. After that revelation, the lieutenant talks to the protagonist and tells him he can trust them. With everything going on, he shouldn't carry it all alone. So, the protagonist tells them what the Joker said about his brother, and the team agrees to put the evangelist investigation on hold for now and help him find his brother. While investigating, the team finds a report on an incident that might be related to the evangelists, and it's from the 8th Division's first mission. Since many of them weren't aware of the history, they explain how the division was formed. It turns out that the lieutenant had a very special partner before meeting the captain. Maki was also there, and she was the daughter of a general. But beyond that, the lieutenant saw something in her and highly valued her efforts. Back to his friend, one night he suddenly starts transforming into an Infernal. He asks the lieutenant to shoot him while he's still conscious, but the guy didn't have the courage to do it. The other soldiers did, even executing him in front of the lieutenant. Since then, the lieutenant kept that pistol as a reminder of his cowardice. Later that same day, there was an incident with an Infernal, and that's when he met Obi, who was working with regular firefighters at the time. Yeah, the ones using water instead of fire. There were 2 Infernals at the scene, one causing chaos and the other calm. The fire force handled the chaotic one, while Obi volunteered to put the calm one to rest. With the lieutenant's help, he managed to shoot and end the Infernal's suffering. Obi then told him that he wanted to start his own company to help people in need and to understand why the fire force was so corrupt. To do that, he needed trustworthy people who cared about others just like he did. And that's how the 8th Division was formed. Back to the present, the team mentions that their first mission was very suspicious. They found a red cross and the victim had no relatives, and the Infernal was wearing white clothes, just like the evangelist's attire. Coincidence? I don't think so. The small detail detail is that all of this happened in the jurisdiction of the 7th Division. You know, the place where the atheist guy who couldn't care less and left the meeting is stationed. The team heads there to investigate. They see that their base looks a lot like ancient Japan. The captain spends his time with 2 twins and a lieutenant named Conro. When the team arrives and asks for help in searching for the evangelist, the captain, as expected, refuses to help. At that moment, an Infernal appears out of nowhere, and the captain handles it without performing the usual prayer. The guy pierces it with his hand and can create and manipulate fire at will, which is why he's incredibly powerful. The craziest part was that he caused a huge mess to take down one Infernal, but the townspeople supported him and didn't mind losing their homes. Yeah, the guy was like a kind of god to them. So, the 8th Division stays in the village to help repair the damage caused by their captain. It turns out that the guy is actually a good person. He just didn't like getting involved in other people's problems. But since the 8th Division members were friendly and the lieutenant gave him a pep talk, he decided he wanted to help. While everyone was working together to repair the houses and Tamaki was showing a bit too much skin, 2 evangelists in the area decided to disguise themselves as Obi and the lieutenant to deceive Waka, the captain of the 7th Division. These dirty tricksters claimed they were the ones who turned the old man into an Infernal and that they planned to do the same to everyone else in the village. They said this with the intention of Waka overhearing, as he was on his way to talk to them and offer his help. But upon hearing this, Waka went crazy and started fighting the entire 8th Division by himself. Captain Obi tried to explain that it was all a misunderstanding, but the guy wouldn't listen. So, he went full Kimetsu with his fire stances and gave everyone a serious beating. Fortunately, the captain managed to find his uniform, chugged 3 glasses of Furoro, and, despite lacking powers, managed to put up a fight. However, all he achieved was making Waka angrier, leading him to use the 7th stance and send everyone to meet San Pedro. Luckily, just before that, Conro arrived and calmed him down. Later, they gathered at the house to talk things over civilly. Obi explained that they had only gone to buy materials and never said anything like that. So, Waka, who from now on we'll call Benny because it sounds much cooler for someone as fachero as him, decided to talk to other people to see if they told the truth. Meanwhile, the team stayed behind to chat with Conro. It turns out Conro has a disease he suffered from a long time ago during a mission, and sooner or later, his body would turn to ashes. This happened while he was protecting Benny from a particularly powerful horned Infernal. Conro used more power than he should have and ended up in this condition. That's why Benny held him in such high regard. In a scene change, we see that after Conro's fight with the Infernal, the captain of the 4th Division, Soichiro, noticed the potential both Conro and the Infernal had. He invited them to join the Empire with the Fire Force, not even as recruits, but as captain and lieutenant. However, since Conro was turning into ash, he handed the position over to Benny, even though he didn't like their working style. After the guy told the 8th Division team all of this, we see that while Benny went off to investigate, his town was in complete disarray. He could change people's appearances. Not only did he do this with Obi and the lieutenant, but with a bunch of people in the town to create chaos and turn Benny against the 8th Division, making it easier to take them down. So, Benny realized something strange was going on, as it was too much of a coincidence that this happened on the same night. Returning to the guys, we see him encountering the twins fighting, and the blondie delivers a serious punch to one of them, but it wasn't actually her. It was an old dwarf created by an evangelist named Yona. This guy was the one deceiving everyone, and as if that weren't enough, he was accompanied by the same archer who took out Rekka and another big, hooded guy. They started creating infernals all over the town to distract Benny, since the 8th Division had no jurisdiction there and couldn't put them to rest. So, taking advantage of the bug, they began attacking the guys. The protagonist and the blondie went to fight the archer and the big guy, while the others took care of evacuating the civilians. But since that pair didn't know how to work as a team, they had some problems amidst the chaos. Returning to the protagonist's fight, we see that the big guy transformed into a horned infernal, basically a demon just like the one that appeared on the day his mother died, and also on the day Conro got sick. Seeing this, the protagonist remembers those events and becomes paralyzed, causing the flames from his feet to disappear. Luckily, the blondie was with him and saves his life. Meanwhile, the arrow-wielding waifu removes her mask and turns out to be very cute, but unfortunately, she's evil. Anyway, she tells the protagonist that he shouldn't belong to the Fire Force, as he's a demon and his flames only serve to exterminate humanity. After that, she vanishes out of nowhere. On the other hand, we see Benny meeting up with Conro. Conro convinces him to lead his people to take down all the infernals and deal with the situation since they would only follow him. So Benny agrees, and the best idea he comes up with is to tell everyone in the town to start fighting each other to find the imposters. Yet folks, a huge mess ensued. Even Tamaki and Maki ended up in a brawl. After Benny gives the orders, he sees the horned infernal fighting against the blondie and goes to help. When he arrives with his bunch of brooms, he tells the guys not to interfere with his fight, as he has scores to settle with the Horned Demon. It wasn't the same one that hurt Conro, but Benny took it personally, knowing his destructive power is enormous. Benny takes the Infernal flying into the sky to eliminate it, but at that moment the arrow-wielding waifu shoots him from behind. Conro tries to stop her, but when he uses his power, the guy almost bursts again, and the only thing he can do is shout at the protagonist to save his friend's life. Hearing the shout, the protagonist regains his confidence and flies off, manages to deflect the arrow, and thanks to that, Benny finishes off the Infernal in an epic way. Afterward, everything returns to normal. They start rebuilding the city the next day, and Benny toasts with Obi to apologize for the misunderstanding, and at the same time, tells him that the 8th Division has the support of the 7th Division to take down the Evangelist.